Hello, and welcome back to If This Is True. Today it's the turn of EVs, and I thought I'd coincide the truth about its environmental and financial costs with the government missing its own targets of trying to force the market. As with many of their net zero concepts, the public just isn't buying it. Literally, you're not buying it. And I want to be really clear up front. I don't care if you choose an electric car or if you don't. I don't care. I believe it should be entirely up to the consumer. And let's face it, if the evidence on EV cars proves that they are a fantastic development, then the majority of the public will buy them. That's how choice works. Capitalism is like democracy. In the end, the people will decide. And it looks like they are deciding, in droves, not to buy them. In the case of EVs, though, something insidious is happening. A forced market shift. One where governments seek to remove personal choice, and it's not just here. Governments worldwide are imposing sweeping mandates to phase out traditional cars without a democratic mandate. And they can't let you choose because so many of you would say no. EVs are painted as the solution to climate change, but they aren't. I'm going to tell you about it. Let's start with the science. The claim that EVs are cleaner and greener begins to unravel the moment we examine the manufacturing process. Producing an EV involves mining rare earth elements such as lithium, cobalt, and nickel. If you haven't seen the Rare Earth Wars video, have a look below. You see, these minerals aren't extracted in pristine, eco-friendly conditions. Instead, they're mined in countries with little regard for environmental standards or labour rights. It's led to deforestation, habitat destruction, and massive carbon emissions. And then, all of that earth needs to be refined using vast quantities of chemicals produced from the fossil fuel industry. And then it needs coal and oil to fuel its energy in the first place. To put this into perspective, extracting 1 ton of lithium requires up to 500,000 gallons of water. And in regions like South America's Lithium Triangle, this has caused water shortages for local communities. It's devastated ecosystems and agricultural livelihoods. The irony? These green vehicles leave a trail of environmental destruction before they've even hit the road.
50% of new cars to be electric by 2030.
True, but I guess now it's 60%.
True or false, a typical electric car requires 6 times the mineral inputs of a conventional car.
Yes.
If 50% of the cars were electric vehicles today, is there enough power on the electric grid to charge them all?
Absolutely not. No.
You said in your written statement, Mr. Bradbury, I'm going to quote you, if every country in the world achieved its stated EV targets by 2030, the total savings in carbon dioxide emissions would be expected to reduce global temperatures by only 0.0002 degrees Fahrenheit by the year 2100. Given this fact, is it unilaterally gutting the U.S. auto market, critical mineral supply chain, and the grid stability? Is that the solution for addressing the temperature goals?
Well, I don't think so.
Additionally, EV construction, of course, relies heavily on plastics derived from petroleum. The green narrative doesn't want to talk to you about the huge increase in plastic needed to build these cars, nor does it want to talk to you about the fact that that will have to continue for many decades. Plastics are used extensively in EV components such as battery casings, dashboards, and lightweight body panels to offset the enormous weight of the battery, which makes the car almost double the weight of a traditional car. And this dependence on oil-derived materials contradicts the argument that EVs eliminate the need for fossil fuels. They don't. So, for comparison, the emissions from producing a single EV battery can be higher than manufacturing an entire internal combustion engine car. And studies are showing now that it can take an EV up to 8 years of driving to offset emissions from its production. But its expected lifespan is only 8 to 10 years, because after that time, the batteries face critical degradation and they have to be replaced. While traditional cars, of course, can last 15, 20 years, many last even longer than that. And then there are the tyres, because wear on EV tyres is much faster than traditional cars because of all that extra weight, meaning additional maintenance and higher costs for you, but also it means far more microplastics are released into the environment from those tyres, which are wearing down more quickly. And a recent study found that EVs produce up to 20% more particulate matter from their tyres than ordinary cars. None of this is sounding very eco-friendly, is it? None of it. And also, seriously, it's very Top Gear. Hello, Jeremy. Now, let's talk about financing. EVs are very expensive to produce, and so therefore they're more expensive to buy, even with government subsidies funded by us, the taxpayer. You certainly can't pick up a runaround for your 17-year-old for £4,000, for example, like I did for my son a few years ago. The cost of manufacturing batteries alone accounts for a significant proportion of that vehicle's price, and those costs are only rising as demand for rare earth minerals increases. Meanwhile, subsidies funnel billions to car manufacturers, leaving taxpayers footing the bill for a technology many can't afford to buy in the first place. In the UK, it's nearly £2 billion and counting. So let's say you bought your car, you decided to buy an EV. What's the depreciation? Because it's a critical factor affecting both personal finances and the broader economy. How do these bad boys depreciate then? Well, since they're in the news, I thought we'd use Jaguar as an example. See, they're telling you that the I-Pace will depreciate 60% in its first 3 years. But is that really true? Because who would want to buy it after 3 years? When the warranty only lasts for 3 years or 100,000 miles, because after 100,000 miles, you need a new battery. That's after your car has depreciated to virtually nothing. It's no wonder people really aren't buying into this, is it? Now, what about charging it? Because we've all seen abandoned cars on the side of the road, and personally, I enjoy watching them being pushed because they're really heavy and it's almost impossible to do. Well, how's charging playing out then? The infrastructure to support the EV revolution by 2030 is a disaster in itself. And a glaring example of this is the disparity in charging point access across regions. So by 2023, the London Borough of Westminster alone had more EV charging points than Birmingham, Manchester and Newcastle combined. The concentration of chargers in affluent urban areas leaves vast regions behind, making EV ownership not only impractical, but almost impossible. In urban areas of London, there's at least one charging point per mile, whilst in more rural areas, it's one charging point every 16 miles. Now, EV car owners already know that they don't get anywhere near the amount of range out of their battery if they've got their radio and their heater on, for example, or their radio and their air conditioning. And you could probably stumble 1 mile, but 16 miles is a long way to travel when you've got no charge. And then you've got the jaw-dropping revelation that some service stations aren't even connected to the grid, and they have to rely on massive diesel generators to power their charging stations. Seriously, it's a joke. And that's reminded me to talk about potholes. We're a bit disjointed in this chat, but let's talk about potholes, because it's no surprise to me that our roads are falling apart. We're told it's poor maintenance, but is it? Or is it also that our roads were not designed to handle the weight of EVs? Imagine the council costs of replacing multi-storey car parks if they're filled with cars double the weight that they planned for originally. Well, they'll all need to be replaced as well. Suck it up, taxpayers. Not forgetting here the fires. Because whilst they're not really more prevalent in electric cars, so we're told, they are incredibly difficult to put out and can cause considerably more emissions and, of course, damage, particularly if it's parked outside your house. And then let's talk about the electricity grid. Well, consider the energy requirements of transitioning of 4.1 million EVs in the UK. Imagine the strain on the grid that we're told is already struggling with demand. We're asking them to generate increased power for data centres, heat pumps, carbon capture machines, and all the other replaced technologies. And now, add the load from EV charging points. In the UK alone, EV targets would require an estimated 20% increase in electricity generation capacity. But hold on, wait a minute. If we do also need to increase grid capacity by 20% just to power data centres, not even joking, do they mean the grid needs to expand by an extra 40% by 2030? To put that into context, that's the equivalent of building 20 new nuclear power stations or covering even more swathes of land with solar panels and wind turbines. It's not possible. So to keep the lights on and industry working, perhaps the government will have to restrict when you can drive. It's handy, of course, if you have those ID cards in place already that will tell you when you can and when you can't, based on the mileage you've covered that week. And they'll know what mileage you've covered this week because your EV is sharing its data on smart roads. Maybe they just don't want you to have cars at all. So back to the point of this chat today is, if you know all these facts and you still make EV your choice, I applaud you, because I applaud your right to choose. Make your decision on whatever you want. But if, like me, you don't want to choose an EV car, then I think life will get very difficult over the next 10 years. And I predict that in order to stop people driving their fuel cars at all, road taxes will increase for cars over 5 years old, and they will keep increasing as those cars age, as a way of forcing you off the road and forcing you into EVs, or not at all. And I'm incredibly uncomfortable with that. Progress is supposed to make our lives better. And like I said right at the beginning, if your choices are taken away from you and your life is made more difficult without you being able to vote on it, then you're no longer living in a democracy. You're living under elitocracy, where decisions are made between governments and corporations, and people simply do as they're told. That's how I feel about EVs. That's the information I found out about EVs. You might have more. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. Like, share, and thank you for joining me. See you next time on If That Is True.